Well, welcome back to Theology in Action. My name is Tony Caffey. I'm the pastor of Verse by Verse Fellowship here in San Antonio. And I'm here today with my good friend, Keith Mirrer. Hey, Keith, good to see you.
Great seeing you.
You shared your story about being a completed Jew, which was really neat, just hearing how the Lord had led you to a place where you came to faith in Jesus. What does that mean, Keith, to be a completed Jew?
I was raised Jewish, and I'm from New York originally. And as time went on, I had several things that happened in my life that made me kind of question where I was in my relationship with God. To define completed Jew, the way I look at it, it is going from the Hebrew Bible and then going into the New Testament or the Christian Bible, if you will, and carrying some of the Hebrew Bible into the Christian Bible and combining them both, but ending up with believing and following Christ. Absolutely it is, yes. Howard's work and bringing faith at work, and again, I'll explain, faith at work in Howard's mind is not necessarily doing Bible studies at work. It's how you treat people at work, how you do business. You know, his goal was when someone comes into your business, they know you're a Christian because of the way you work, the way you do things.
Yeah.
So in addition to the books, he was trying to get the word out on how do you do this? And we started a program called The High Calling of Your Daily Work. And these were radio spots, 60-second radio spots. Started out small, just here in San Antonio. We would find stories all over the place, and people would write to us about it and things like that. And we would develop the story into a 60-second radio spot. And we would have to, edit it and bring it down and stuff. And we would record about, I guess, 8 or 9 at a time in studio, and then edit them down to make sure they hit the 60. Actually, we hit them for 57 seconds because Howard's ending would always be about Laity Lodge, the high calling of your daily work. I mean, you'd say, this is Howard Budd of Laity Lodge, and remember about the high calling of your daily work. We ended up doing billboards, all kinds of stuff. We really just expanded. By the time we stopped doing it, we were on 3,000 stations all over the country. Christian and non-Christian stations.
Yeah.
So it was, we considered it a success. People would contact us. They wanted more, so we started a website called The High Calling of Your Daily Work. Actually called it The High Calling. And we would have writing. We would write pieces for it. I had people, very, very talented people. One of them you met at the luncheon, very Marcus, and very talented people who would write pieces for it. We had pastors all over the country writing pieces for it. We got into video. We were doing video on it. We had the radio spots on it so people can call them up at any time. So we were doing that for several years.
How satisfying was that working?
Extremely, because I never expected it to explode like that. We ended up hiring an agency out of New York, which I would meet with twice a year down in New York, and discussing where are we going from here, what stations, what networks. We went more into networks than individual stations because of pricing and whatever. So it was a very exciting time. But back to the Laity Lodge forums, Howard, again, wanted to be able to talk face-to-face with CEOs and board chairs about what his concept of faith at work would be. So we had this thing every 2 years, because it took 2 years to put it together. And we would have it at a resort. It could be in Palm Beach, Florida, whatever. And these people paid, their own way and did their own thing. But we had them in places that people would want to go to.
CEOs of companies,
board chairman and board members,
folks.
Actually, of these same companies, like PepsiCo, Johnson & Johnson, major companies like that, Coca-Cola. And some of these folks would be out speakers, because some of them were already doing it. The chairman of Johnson & Johnson was already a committed Christian, and he would get up and tell his stories. We would spend a great deal of time doing this. We'd always have one really well-known individual. For instance, Jim Baker, Secretary of State Jim Baker, and he was Secretary of Treasury at one time. His wife Susan
Okay.
would speak all over the country, and so Susan would speak, and Secretary Baker would come with them.
Oh, wow.
My job for these things were multiple. I was responsible for the recording of all this, so I had professional TV people, and I would act as director and camera one, camera two kind of stuff, and also I was to make all their arrangements. So if they were landing at such and such a place, we would pick them up with a limo or something, and then drive them back and make sure they had rooms and all that stuff. So we kind of, that was my job. That took a lot of time and effort and planning to do. Probably the best known name that we had that really impressed the heck out of me was Archbishop Tutu.
South African, right?
Yes, Desmond Tutu. And the folks who arranged for all this in our organization you have to work through agents and all that stuff, arranged for him to come. And there are lots of stories about him, but I don't think I've ever met anybody as humble as this person. He did not want to be called Archbishop. He wanted to be called Father. He made a point of that. I met him at the airport with a security detail because that we needed it for him, and took him back to the hotel, got him to his room and everything. And he was going to speak, the last speaker of the program on Sunday. I want to show you what kind of a person he was. First of all, he was very short. And I expected somebody to come off the airplane in flowing robes and whatever. He was wearing red pants, a golf shirt, and a little cap. That was it. And if you didn't know who he was, you would never know who he was when he came in. So when he was going to speak, he was dressed informally also. He never wore any of his clerical things. And his room was, I don't know, 5 or 6 doors down from mine. So I went to pick him up with a security detail, and we're walking down the hall. And I'm going to get killed for saying this, but we're walking down the hall, and Pat was coming out of our room just as we were passing, and he stopped everything. And when he stopped, I looked at him and said, Father, I'd like to introduce you to my wife, Pat. And he went over to her, and he took her hand and bowed from the waist down and kissed her hand and said, your husband has great taste in women. And, this is him. This is how he was. And then we got back into our little deal and went down. He did his talk, which was phenomenal. And then, we left, and I took him back to the airport and whatever. So that was the kind of atmosphere that we had there, but he was just an absolutely amazing person.
So Howard would use these events to try to incorporate the gospel in some instances?
The gospel, yeah, he would, because Howard would speak, but his goal was not to preach at people. It was to get them to understand, because we broke into small groups, which is what they do at Laity Lodge. We broke into small groups, and people are open up about really personal things. Yep. We'd have a staff member in each group. Just to help facilitate a little bit. I had, I was in one group. I wasn't necessarily facilitating, but I was in there and helped to talk and stuff like that. And we had, so we had people, saying some, and everything was confidential. So people were able to say some things and some experiences they had. That was Howard's goal. We'd have a nice dinner at night and a speaker that night. But again, it was never the preaching kind of speaking. It was the, here's my experience, and here's the things I've experienced. We had people who were on Undercover Boss, who were Christians, and they told us their experience about being Undercover Boss, would show it. We had the founder, I'm trying to think of the name of the company now, but it's one of the production, now they're a big production company, but he came in and talked about what it meant to be a Christian in that environment, that kind of thing. So it was mostly testimonies.
Mm-hmm. Wasn't like Pastor Tony on Sunday morning preaching up here, huh?
Yeah. And it wasn't. The interesting thing about it, it was to me, I hate to use the word religious because to some people that means something else, but it was a very deeply moving time, but it wasn't preaching.
Hmm. Yeah. Good. I see the benefit of that in the kind of corporate setting and see how
Yeah, because it
somebody
was the
like,
people you're dealing with, and these were
Mhm,
people, who are very, very busy people, but
mhm,
have managed somehow in their lives to incorporate their Christian beliefs in what they
mhm.
did. They wouldn't go into a staff meeting and say, "Now we're going to pray," or something. Maybe they
Right.
did, I don't know, but that wasn't their deal.
Mhm.
Their deal was they wanted to make sure that their Christian lives came through in all their dealings and what they did.
Cool, Keith. Well, you're one of my favorite conversation partners. You have great
Thank you.
stories. You've experienced a lot in life, and the Lord has taken you to some neat places and allowed you to do some neat things. Here recently, you've had a pretty significant bout with cancer,
Yes.
and it's almost like the Lord has taken you in, hyperdrive and an even more challenging, but also um, thoughtful and teaching process as you've gone through this battle. So tell me just a little bit about that.
Okay, I guess a short version would be I was going through my annual physical, and the night after I did the blood work and stuff, my doctor called and said, "Keith, I've got I'm concerned." He said, "I want you tomorrow to get a CAT scan and an MRI, and I'm going to arrange for it to be stat, which in hospital language is quick.
Mm,
You don't have to wait a week for the return." He said, "Your blood work, your liver is way off the scale, and there's something wrong."
mm,
I said, "Okay." So I did the next morning, and he called me that afternoon, and he said, "Well, I've got some bad news." And I said, "What is it?" He said, "You have cholangiocarcinoma."
mhm,
And I said, "That's great, but what is that? What is that in English?" And
mm,
he said, "It's cancer of the bile duct." He said, "It's a very rare, very aggressive, and very dangerous uh, form of cancer."
mm,
I said, "Well, what do I do now?" And he said, "Well, I'm going to go look around for an oncologist for you and see what needs to be done." He said, "My knowledge is that the only remedy for this, if it works, is a very invasive surgery. And it's very invasive. There's a long recovery period, but I'm going to look into it." This was on a Thursday. By coincidence, a friend who used to be my doctor, who had retired, uh, his wife called Pat, and this was during COVID. So she said, "We don't get out, and you don't get out," and we hadn't spoken for a long time. But she said, "Why don't we have cocktails uh, via Zoom? And maybe you eat and you eat what you want. We can talk." And Pat said, "Yeah, that sounds great." And because I wasn't necessarily in the mood to party, but I said, "Yeah, all right, let's go do that." So this was on a Friday night, and Pat came in and said, "Sam," she said, "I need to ask you a question." And she told him what my diagnosis was. And she said, "If this was you, what would you do?"
mm. Yeah.
He said, "I would pack my bags tomorrow and I'd go to MD Anderson in Houston." He said, "Because surgeries that are rare mean that people aren't deeply experienced. They can do it, but they're not deeply experienced in it. But at MD Anderson, I'm sure they are." And we did.
Hmm.
We went down there. Um, and because it was COVID, and that's when hospitals really kind of shut the doors, if you will,
Yep.
Pat wasn't even allowed to go in with me. And the way you go to MD Anderson is you go through the emergency room. So I went in there, and for some reason they were expecting me. I have a feeling Sam may have called, but they were expecting me. And the prayer I had was that I didn't necessarily pray, "Please don't let this happen to me and cure me and whatever," which I'm not making fun of. I mean, it's a valid prayer.
Yeah.
But somehow I felt I needed to pray for strength versus the cure.
Mm.
The strength to go through this, the strength for my family to be able to go through this. And if you don't mind, I want to just
Yes,
read.
please.
I found this, and it really fit what I was doing. It said, "Fear not, for I am with you." This is out of Isaiah 41:10. "Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. Yes, I will help you, and I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." And I didn't know that verse then, but that's what I kept praying. So when I went into intake, I met with this doctor, and at that time I was, it's been 2 years, so about 77, 78. And he looked at me and said, I had to go through a scan and all that stuff. And he said, "Okay, yeah, you definitely have cholangio." And he said, "Normally I don't operate on people your age,
Mm.
but you're seen to be in a lot better shape than most people your age, so I'll do it." And I said, "Well, will the hospital, be any problem?" He said, "Let me put it this way. I'm the chairman of this department. And when I say I'm going to operate, I'm going to operate." He said, "So you're in. I will take care of that."
Mm.
And then he gave me a plan of how. Oh, then I met my oncologist, who ends up being the number 2 person in the world for this particular disease. And they laid out a plan, and I was going to go through radiation first, and then have a couple of weeks off to get in the best shape I could, which would involve exercising and walking and whatever, and then have the surgery. And the reason I'm going into detail, because the Lord kind of followed me through and held my hand through all of this. So, you always hear about radiation and being sick and you having
Yeah.
burns on your body and stuff. So I'm in the waiting room waiting for my first session. And the radiologist came by, Dr. Ludmere came by, a young guy, and he looked at me and he said, "You're Keith Mirrer, right?" And I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Looking at your, all your radiology, you're going to do really well with this. Your prognosis is good."
Okay.
And, having worked in a hospital for 11 years, I kind of knew doctors try to, keep you calm and keep you relaxed. I said, "Well, that's great, but I understand this is really bad." And, and he looked at me and he's straight in the eye and he said, "They teach us several things here at MD Anderson. The one thing they do not teach us, and we are not allowed to do, is lie. When I tell you you have a good prognosis, you have a good prognosis."
Mm.
So that was really moving for me and kind of an answer to prayer. So I went through my 10 things and had no negative reaction whatsoever. I mean, not the smallest type of reaction. Went home. We came back up here. Oh, and then when we went down there, the big thing is where we were going to stay.
Mm-hmm.
And a person from our church gave us a call and said, "By the way, when I lived down there, the such and such church down there owns apartments,
Okay.
and they rent them at cost to people going to MD Anderson and are under treatment." And sure enough, we got an apartment.
Mm.
And this was on real short notice. So we got an apartment. So we had, and it was like, bedroom, 1-bedroom apartment with a full kitchen, the whole deal. And so that made life a lot easier for us. Came home, did my walking and all that stuff, got my strength back up. Went back, I think it was the day after Christmas. Supposed to have my surgery on January 2nd. On January 1st, I had a lot of pain in my back and was having problems breathing. And I called my surgeon and he said, "Get to the emergency room right now." So they got me to the emergency room, and what they found out was they had put a temporary stent in the bile duct because of the cancer, and it got infected somehow. I mean, it's not totally unusual, but it happens, and that infection was spreading. So they put me in the hospital and put me on an IV drip. I was there for 7 days. Came back to obviously canceled the surgery. I came home, and for another 7 or 10 days, I was on an IV bag I carried around with me at the apartment, and they put a stent in me, so we would just screw in every day. You had to change the bag and all that stuff, and which was a looking at it was like a comedy of errors between Pat and I doing this, but it it got me over the infection. We found out later, had they opened me up with that infection, I would have been dead in 5 minutes. It would have just shot right through my entire body. So again, I mean, the pain was uncomfortable and all that stuff, but the good Lord, I just look at it as the good Lord was just looking after me. So we got through it, and my surgery was on February 3rd of that year,
Hmm.
and that was February 3rd of 21. Um, my daughter Erin, came down the night before or a couple of days before, and they dropped me off at the hospital at 5 o'clock in the morning. And I was probably the calmest person of the group.
I'm sure.
I turned everything over to the Lord,
Mm.
and He gave me that strength because I was never a good hospital person, but He gave me the strength. I went in there, did what I had to do, without any worry. It was just unbelievable. The surgery turned out to be a 10-hour procedure.
Wow.
They removed some things and revamped some other things and whatever. And I was in the hospital for a little while, and got back to the apartment, and I guess it was like maybe a 10-day period there where I can only eat I ate 6 or 8 meals a day that were that size of a quarter. I mean, just little tiny meals, and maybe a dab of peanut butter. That would be a meal. And I did not want to eat. I wasn't hungry, and I was on like 12 different medications.
Yeah.
Plus, I had to give myself a shot every day with blood thinner. And I never thought I'd be able to give myself a shot, ever. But I gave myself a shot every day of blood thinner, and ate these little meals, and Pat force fed me to eat. And gradually I got my strength back. And, after 10 days, I was declared, clean or clear, whatever you want to call it. But my oncologist said, well, now we need to talk about putting you on medication. And I said, what kind of medication? And he said, the word just slipped me, chemo. We're going to put you on chemo. Now, having been in that hospital and walking back and forth to the different clinics, I saw people on chemo, and they were pale and curled up and cold. I mean, my heart went out to them. And he said, "This is going to be a different kind of chemo. We use a different system here. It's going to be oral. You're going to do it at home, and we'll see how it goes." So I said, well, why am I doing this? If I'm clean, why am I going through chemo? And he said, because if just one cell escaped, you'd be back here, and it would be nothing we could do for you. He said, so I want to make sure that one cell did not escape. And so he went ahead and prescribed this. And, the people down there were just amazing, because I'd get a call from their pharmacy, and they'd say, okay, now are you ready for, the name of this stuff was real long. I would take 2 tablets in the morning after eating, and 2 tablets in the evening after eating. We'd do that for 3 weeks, and then I'd have a week off and do it again for 3 weeks. And I did that from, I guess it was the beginning of May to the end of September. And they would call me and say, we're putting your because it's all exclusively compounded just for me. They put it together, and they say, are you ready? You having any reactions or anything? I had absolutely zero reaction, zero, other than always having to eat a meal because I had to take the medication, which I needed to do anyway, because I lost 40 pounds during the procedure. Which I needed to lose anyway. But it's not a diet I would recommend. and I started taking the chemo and took it. I went down every month to be examined and get a scan. And in September, they finally said, okay, you don't need to take the chemo anymore and come down every 3 months and you'll get a scan, do blood work. And the third person on my team is a nutritionist and who's a very particular nutritionist. And she measured, I mean, there were times I go down and give 15 vials of blood because she measured every single thing I could possibly have in my system. And she would make sure that my B12 was up or whatever was up and where it's supposed to be. I was anemic after the surgery, so she put me on iron pills, just those kinds of things. And I'd meet with her after meeting with my surgeon and my oncologist, and we would talk, and I even talked to her from the house. And that went on for 2 years. And in my last visit, which was like 2 weeks ago, I'm still clean. I'm still seeing the nutritionist and my oncologist and my surgeon, but they extended it to every 6 months now. So, which is obviously, good news. And the only thing I have, my only after effect is I have to take certain capsules when I eat. And that provides some of the enzymes I've lost because of some of the surgery.
Praise the Lord.
Praise the Lord, absolutely. And again, he just praying for strength ended up being the right thing for me. May not be the right thing for everybody, but it was the right thing for me. I was extremely fortunate. I say fortunate. I think God had his hand in it, but because I had it, we caught it early, very, very early. I now support a group called the Cholangiocarcinoma Foundation.
Oh.
I support them every month financially, but also I'm one of their mentors. And so I have 3 or 4 people that I mentor, which are people who just found out they have this and have all kinds of questions. And I'm able to at least help them or research, if they needed some help with that.
I remember meeting you last year, and I can't remember the exact words you said, but something to the effect of, I shouldn't be here. I'm a walking miracle. And
yeah, that's what my doctor said. My doctor here calls me the walking miracle because I found out afterwards, depending on how far down or how far along they catch you with this, the survival rate is 14%. And, I didn't know that before surgery, and it's just as well I didn't know it. I don't know if it would have phased me or not, but I was ready to do whatever the Lord wanted me to do. I mean, it was just such a blessing to know that he had his hand on my shoulder. And it didn't, if it didn't work, it didn't work. If it worked, it worked. I mean, I was more worried about my family than I was myself. Sure. And, but it worked. Yeah. My doctor here calls me the walking miracle.
Well, thanks for sharing that. I know that's personal, Keith. And I know there's people that might even be listening to this who are thinking about how to, trust the Lord through a health crisis or maybe some other crisis. I mean, life is hard. There's challenges here. I guess I want to close with this and just ask you, you've had an amazing journey. The Lord has taken you through a lot of different things. What's the most important thing that you want to share with people, Jews, Gentiles, Christians, non-Christians? If you had 60 seconds to share one message with the world, what would that be?
Well, if you don't mind my reading again.
Yes, please.
This morning, I read out of streams in the desert every morning, and it starts out with a Bible verse, and this one was from Matthew 10:27. What I tell you in the dark, speak in the daylight. What is whispered in your ear, proclaim from the roofs. And to me, that means, as a Christian, I have an obligation to speak about my belief. But there's another obligation, and it's an obligation to listen as well, which I've had to learn how to do. And you listen for God's voice. I mean, you don't actually hear a voice, but you listen for his reply to what you ask. As a Christian, it's my responsibility to tell people about my Christianity. As a person who may not be a Christian, it's that person to at least listen. You don't have to just accept, but you can listen. And I listened when Pat spoke to me. I listened when the pastor who
in
baptized
Wichita?
me.
Yeah.
Pat, I listened then. I listened when I prayed, but I had to learn to be quiet and listen to something that's being said to me. And it's the news from the Lord.
Thank you, Keith. Appreciate you,
Thank
brother.
I even listened to you.
Hey, yeah, you're a good listener. Thank you for that. Well, appreciate you coming on and sharing your story and just telling us a little bit about your journey. And glad to have you as a friend and glad to have you here at Verse by Verse Fellowship as well.
You're a blessing to us and my family. And, I thank you. And I obviously a blessing in the church, but thank you for the time.
Thanks, Keith. Well, that ends this session of Theology in Action. For those of you who are interested, we did a previous recording with Dr. Arnold Fruchtenbaum on the subject of Jewish evangelism and how to share your faith with somebody who comes from a Jewish background. So I would encourage you to take a listen to that and stay tuned for more Theology in Action.